All right. I feel like now it's time to move on to Chicago.
Chicago's another funky one because I think I often forget that this team kind of moved into we want to be competitive right now mode with the Nikola Vucevic trade. Like they have him and Zach LaVine with Patrick Williams ready to explode. They've got to figure out what to do with Daniel Tice and Lauri Markkanen, but there's already like a decent amount of incumbent talent here, and I think that this is a sneaky landing spot for Kyle Lowry.
Holy shit. Please expound.
Well, it's I don't think they've been discussed whatsoever as a landing spot, but there's
They
a
were,
compelling pitch
if
there.
that's any consolation. Matt Moore of
Okay,
Action Network reported that they would be in the mix.
even better. But it is a remarkably compelling landing spot because if you assume that Williams, who was one of the youngest players in the NBA this past season, makes a substantial leap forward, you have a scoring title threat in Zach LaVine. You have a big who can create his own offense at the drop of the hat in Vucevic. You have a defensive oriented Kawhi Leonard approximation, poor man's Kawhi Leonard approximation in Williams. You have depth at a lot of different positions, and then you add Lowry into the mix, and that could be a piece that immediately elevates Chicago into the mix. He makes a ton of sense with Zach LaVine, a guy who can shoulder more of the defensive responsibilities against the opponent's best backcourt member, who's willing to defer offensive touches, as we've seen with him playing next to Kawhi Leonard, with him playing next to an emerging Fred VanVleet. I love that fit in the backcourt. And given Chicago's penchant for making these all-in moves, as we saw with Vucevic, they could be a serious contender to make that kind of splashy addition.
I don't know what their pathway is to getting Lowry, though. So the two things I'll mention there, they can get to, if they renounce everyone, they'll have about 12.4 million in cap space, but that's with keeping Thaddeus Young and Thomas Satoransky. Those guys have $11 million in combined guaranteed salary. So you could technically waive them, stretch that. And then I guess you would have close to enough room, if not enough room to get
Or
Lowry.
move Satoransky into someone else's cap space because he's a very realistic rotation member.
That's I would say you could do the same with Thaddeus Young too, because I was going to ask you. It feels like the most realistic bet would be to get Kyle Lowry by sign and trade at that point, just given their limitations.
Yep.
And I don't know what they give up because they traded this year's first round pick and they traded 2023's first round pick. So I like the idea of Lowry in Chicago. That case you made, I really had Lowry and LaVine just makes too much sense almost.
It would be great, but yeah, the pathway is tricky.
The the other thing with them, which was tough figuring out targets, I don't know what they do with Zach LaVine. So he is not going to sign an outright extension with Chicago. 120% raise off of his current number for the following year, 2022, 2023, still brings him like 11 million or whatever short of his projected max. What they can do is renegotiate and extend him, which for our listeners who don't know that, what that effectively boils down to is they give him an immediate raise up to his current max salary, which I think would land at like 33.7, 33.8, whatever it is. You have to use, and then you can extend him off that number, but you have to use cap space to do it. They don't even have enough cap space without waiving or finding takers for Satoransky and Thaddeus Young to bring him up to that max number. Now, he could be willing to take a little bit less because once he gets a raise, he'll be at the max next year. And if he wasn't going to make the max this upcoming season anyway, yeah, he might be open to that. But then you've spent your resources on retaining talent who wasn't even technically leaving because he's on the books for a year. And you've sort of hindered your exceptions too, because now all of a sudden you're working with the room exception, which is like half of the non-taxpayers mid-level exception. My question to you before I do have a couple targets for them is if you're the Bulls, are you renegotiating and extending Zach LaVine, or are you letting this ride out until free agency and banking on the fact more so we'll try and make moves this summer, show him we're ready to win, and he'll want to stay? You also risk losing him for nothing in that scenario.
I'm letting it ride right now. For all the limitations that you mentioned, and I don't know what the pathway to improvement is without the win now moves first. Because ultimately, if you look up and down this roster, who besides Patrick Williams is going to become a star?
Yeah, you would have to like Kobe White. That
And sure, like you could convince me of that. You could convince me that they could re-sign Markkanen and turn him into a star, but these are less likely scenarios. So I think that the best play is to convince him by winning now.
I'm like with you, but the idea of letting him reach free agency, unless he's told you he's coming back no matter what, would be terrifying. I do agree with you that it seems like they're if and look, if they don't make any additions, like that would clue me into like Zach LaVine didn't know, didn't commit to anything, and so we're gonna hear Zach LaVine trade rumors. But aside from Lowry, I know people like Lonzo Ball here. His fit's fine. I would prefer Spencer Dinwiddie here, just as another creator, if you could get him. I also think that they need to focus on the wing rotation. They only need complementary wings at this point because you do have Zach LaVine to create. Yeah, you'd prefer a playmaking one, but you have Vooch you could run the offense through. So maybe you can kind of zero in on. I don't want to recycle the same names here over and over again, but like a Josh Richardson, Reggie Bullock, if you can get him, they could. I don't know that they'll be in like the running for the super veterans. I was curious to see how you would feel about this one if they decide to work with cap space. Let's say they just create more. Do you like the idea of like a Duncan Robinson in Chicago, or does that lean too far into just offense
I think it
specialty?
leans too far into the offensive specialties. You already have two guys who can score 25 points a night.
Yeah, I thought about Gary Trent Jr. momentarily, but I think they probably want someone a little bit bigger. I just don't view Danny Green as super realistic for them. They would be an interesting Josh Hart team again if they had cap space. They were really tough for me, and I might. I think my guess would be if they have their druthers, they'll funnel most of their money towards the point guard situation. In which case, I would almost expect them to wind up with one of Lonzo Ball, Dinwiddie, or Schroeder. I don't know if all of those guys amount to the right move, but that would almost be my expectation. And then maybe they're looking to fill out the wings on a budget-ish type thing where it's, Terrence Davis is a restricted free agent. What could he do for us? We've talked about Garrison Matthews' value on this podcast. Would they give Sterling Brown some rotation minutes here? Alec Burks, not really a wing, but someone I guess that they could look at. So a Torrey Craig. I'm wondering, I feel like that's the route. This could also be just based off their defensive needs on the wings. And I know they have Patrick Williams. This might become, should they, as expected, decline his team option, like the Justice Winslow experiment team. Like that might be the
You
interesting.
could totally see that. And I think the Torrey Craig route is probably the most realistic of all these scenarios where they're going to make a move for that defense first wing and try to prioritize re-signing some of their pieces like Tice or Markkanen. But still, I'm sure that you, like me now, just can't get that Lowry idea out of your head.
No, I can't. I was going to ask, what do you think about TJ McConnell for this team?
It would also be a fun one. I think anything that's going to help that wing defense.
They were the toughest ones to like pinpoint specific players for some reason. I think because there's so much variance in their outcomes, and they could theoretically. I don't have a name here, but just based off the fact that you do have Patrick Williams, you do have Kobe White, you do still have salary filler. If they want to try and make like a big, like really triple down on this roster, I guess they could go that route. I'm too much of a fan of Patrick Williams. Just by far and away, seemed like a much better defender than most rookies, but had more positional range than I ever would have expected him to. So I wouldn't do that. But anything's on the table after that Vooch trade to me. That was
I would
something
be shocked if Patrick Williams is moved.
I don't think they should. But I'm saying if they're really that committed to LaVine as the Vooch trade sort of intimated, nothing would surprise me at this point.
Yeah, I can see that.